Okay. We'll go ahead and call the September 21st Ferndale Planning Commission meeting to order. Sorry for the delay. We had another meeting beforehand that ran a little bit over. But at this point, we do have an agenda this evening. Are there any edits to the agenda? Otherwise, I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
I'll move to approve the agenda as submitted.
Support.
Okay, we have a motion to approve and support. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, agenda is set. Next up, we have approval of the minutes from our
Madam
last...
Chair, if I may, we skipped roll call.
Yeah, I was going to just...
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Cesar? Here. Farr?
Here.
Casio?
Here.
Baker?
Here.
Kelly?
Here.
Williamson?
Here.
Brazen? Here. Martin?
Here.
And Chair Rodiger.
Here. Thank you for that. Sorry. All right, next up is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was August 17th, 2016. Are there any edits proposed to the minutes? Otherwise, I'll look for a motion to approve as submitted.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve and supported. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right, this evening we do have two items under new business. Neither one is a public hearing, correct?
Neither.
Neither. Okay. The first up for new business is 2020 Burdette Street, site plan for Madison Heights Glass. Justin, if you could introduce the topic, please.
Sure. Last month, Advanced Building Group was here on behalf of KV Investors. Madison Heights Glass is looking for site plan approval for their primary site at 2020 Burnett. Is really the start of the campus, and they have a few associated addresses, as was included in your packet. Madison Heights Glass is a design and fabrication company that have been in the city for a few years now, and they've slowly acquired some parcels over the years that are adjacent to their facility. They're looking to build a new nearly 19,000 square foot warehouse to the campus, and they'll also be including some landscaping, some screening, some parking improvements as well. They're currently still in the process of acquiring some right-of-way of East Breckenridge. So as you saw on the site plan, there includes a gate that will be accessed by the applicant and has been cleared internally. Its next steps is just really getting to City Council for that type of approval. Just generally, the site is zoned M1, future land use. Also classifies it as industrial, both the 2008 and 2016 plan. As part of the site plan review, we looked at compliance with all the ordinances in the city related to parking, exterior lighting, screening, stormwater, and building design. Certainly parking, that's one of the biggest additions to the site. Generally, the parking meets ordinance. After the site plan review was discussed, there was the applicant talked with the applicant about adding a bike rack that'll be part of the final site plan approval. Regarding lighting, a photometric plan will be submitted, and then there were some stormwater retention details that needed to be addressed through the engineering plan, and that'll come through the next steps as well. So you'll see those as conditions in part of your packet. All of the new parking is going to be landscaped and screened, and according to the ordinance, they're adding 10 trees, some parking lot trees, some green belt trees that are surrounded by some landscape islands, adding a hedgerow that'll screen that off-street parking area, which if you drove by recently, it's pretty much just open to the elements, so that parking will be screened according to ordinance. There's not a dumpster on the plan. If you recall last month, all the waste disposal is internal. That's just the general overview, but the applicant's requesting site plan review and approval tonight for this warehouse expansion, and I'm here to answer any questions, and the applicant's here as well.
Thank you. All right. Sir, if you introduce yourself and anything you want to add.
Yeah, Scott Richardson with Advanced Building Group. I was here last month. Really, I've already spoke with Justin basically regarding his comments, and pretty minor in general. We plan to pick all those up on our set for permit review, basically. So, I mean, I think we addressed them pretty well last time. Added a lot of landscaping that was mentioned at the last meeting. I think we picked up all that stuff really on our submission. So, yeah, just looking for your guys' review and approval. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Again, since you were here last month, I think most of us are familiar with the project. One of the questions I had off of the staff report was bumper blocks. So are those being removed?
I think that we kind of wanted to see your opinion on it. It was only shown right close to the warehouse, and that was just to protect the building in general and people that might be walking in front. But you know, as it mentions in here, yeah, the bumper blocks are prohibited. But I'm not sure if you can speak on, Scott, on the thinking behind those, if those are truly necessary.
I don't know that they're necessary based on the type of curb or sidewalk we have there. I
Okay.
mean, typically, you wouldn't need them, but, because we do have a wider walk there. So,
Right. With the sidewalk there, usually the city prefers not to see the bumper blocks. So I mean,
yep. we
unless
can-
you have a compelling reason why they need to be there, I don't know why we would grant a variance or.
No,
modification.
I could ask our engineer if there was a reason about that, but, because ultimately, yeah, you wouldn't need them, so.
One of the questions too, after going back through the minutes and this more discussion, I think we talked a little bit about, you guys were, it's important to have a kind of an employee outdoor area.
Yep.
Where did that land?
It's probably, you see the green space, we added some landscaping in between the existing building and the proposed building.
That just looks like it's going to be pretty much landscaped.
It's some landscape, and that's kind of where John, the owner, was hoping that he could fit in a picnic table or something like that, so, as of right now.
Okay. One of the thoughts I had or questions, I think it was talked about briefly, was the northwest corner of the property. I know you have a little bit more parking than required, and there kind of is some area up there that right now is kind of just,
Yeah.
it's not really convenient to the front door. And then right now there's an existing chain link fence immediately abutting the sidewalk, and I was kind of hoping that maybe as part of this beautification of this property, you would extend the shrub line on that portion
Okay.
of the site as well. Maybe look at maybe greening that little corner, maybe to provide a space or at least separate the sidewalk from the
parking.
parking lot with maybe some green space, or is it at a minimum the same treatment you're doing on the rest of the property?
Yeah, they're pretty much adding some boxwoods and stuff, yeah, to separate the sidewalk from the parking, so I mean, that's something we
Yes.
could address with the owner and.
Yeah, leaving the chain link fence, our existing kind of neglects that little corner.
Yeah, right.
We should just continue it across the front.
Okay.
Chair, I had a question for staff. Is there a reason to include as a condition that city council approve that right-of-way acquisition? Is the plan still viable without it? I know that it seems to be in process, but
If I may, through the chair, I had the same question. I'd suggest we add it as a condition unless there's a compelling reason not to.
Yeah, I guess if the right-of-way was not completed, it would just simply be, I think, just the fence would be removed, obviously.
wouldn't it change some of the circulation, or no?
I think that the owner would probably still likely block off that corner that,
People couldn't drive through?
right, because that was really one of the primary
That's
concerns.
the main thing, it's a
Yeah.
massive, it's an issue just with
Yeah.
people trying to get a shortcut around the light at Camborne and.
The train?
and
I don't
the
wanna
train
allude
and
to
all
that.
that
Yeah,
stuff, and
I don't wanna
that's
allude
his
to the
main
fact they'll
thing, I
have a
mean,
problem.
it's tight over there, even, plece and stuff run through there sometimes too, and, if you're not paying attention, it could be
I think that the owner, when I was out there, he had mentioned he almost was
Oh,
ran
yeah,
over
he
as
was
well, but,
clipped one day,
yeah. But that can be a
Yeah,
condition.
I don't want to suggest that you're going to have a problem getting the right of way, but I also don't want to preclude city council's right to take a variant opinion.
No, I think it's a valid addition.
That was my only question.
Yeah, it would be conducive to our business, really, just how they're setting us up with the pull-through and stuff, Justin, how we talked
Right.
with the building across the street, but, I mean, if it's, something that's an issue, then, yeah.
If I may,
I
through-
wasn't suggesting it was an issue.
Oh,
Just-
okay.
Yeah, no, I don't think there will be, but just in case. And if I may, through the chair, what's your time frame for the construction?
Well, we're hoping to get our permit set in fairly soon here, and I'm trying to get the site graded and get it cut and maybe a building pad up and slab before the bad weather hits.
Okay.
So my steel and stuff is right now projected at around middle of January to be ready, so.
Thank you.
Other questions, thoughts on the site? it is pretty straightforward. Like I said, as we talked last time, it's always great to see a business that's so successful they need to expand and better yet, stay here in the city.
Yeah, right.
So we think we talked through a lot of things last time, so.
I'd like to move in the matter of 2020 Burdette Street. The Planning Commission approved the site plan based on the dated received by the Planning Commission August 30th, 2016, with the following findings and subject to the following conditions in addition to City Council's approval of the right-of-way.
I'll support, but I'd offer a friendly amendment. I'd offer two additional conditions: the removal of the bumper blocks that are currently located on the site plan and extending the shrub line along the northwest corner of the parking lot.
I will agree to the amendments.
Okay. I'll second my amendment.
We have a motion on the table and supported for the motion in the packet with the addition of 3 additional conditions as stated. A discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, I'll take a voice vote, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
much.
Appreciate it.
No problem. Okay, next up this evening, we have a site plan for 165 East 9 Mile Road, mixed-use development. Similarly, this was before us, was it last month?
2 months ago?
For a conceptual discussion as well. So Justin, do you want to give us kind of an update of what's happened since then? And
Sure. So Krieger Klatt Architects are here on behalf of the applicant, North Star Properties, and the property owners here as well. The property is just nearby here at 165 East 9 Mile, zoned CBD, Central Business District, bound by a city-owned parking lot to the west, Ferndale Collision to the north. There's also a public alley to the north. Like Sarah said, we had some discussion at July's meeting for the proposed 4-story mixed-use building. The applicant listened to that feedback, then finally sent over some revised site plans. LSL Planning actually did the review of the site plan, and since that time, we worked through many of the conditions that were included there, mostly related to bike parking, some screening, stormwater facilities maintenance agreement, and the tandem residential parking. The applicant is seeking 3 waivers from the Planning Commission tonight, and would need to pursue 1 variance for a maneuvering lane through the Board of Zoning Appeals. And so they would submit that application after this. So generally, a lot of the discussion was surrounding parking, and that was what we had talked about before. So the ordinance requires new buildings to provide parking related to the off-street parking requirements, unless there's a reduction approved by this commission. So there are 34 ground floor spaces proposed for the 27 upper level residential units. 7 of those units are the tandem spaces that you saw on site, and they're specific for assigned units in the building. There's also a 1,900 square foot commercial space that's proposed on the ground floor of the building. There's not on-site spaces for those uses, and so in the staff report I just included, tenants have not been selected for that space yet, so there is a number of, a variety of whether it be 7 spaces required to 20 spaces, depending on if a restaurant with alcohol use was there. So the one of the waivers would be for a parking waiver, and I included a condition that, should that waiver be, or should that future tenant be a restaurant with alcoholic beverages sold there, they would need to go through the payment in lieu process through City Council.
If I may, through the chair, Justin, can you clarify the waiver is lacking how many spaces?
If it was for office or retail, it'd be 7 to 8 spaces. If it were a restaurant with alcohol use, it'd be 20 spaces. So that item is one condition. Another waiver was just related to an overhead door that faces Bermuda Street, that the ordinance prohibits an overhead door facing a public street. That door, I believe, is for refuse collection. I think that we've kind of seen that some other places in the city. I think overhead doors are starting to be utilized more, but that is something that the Planning Commission has to consider tonight. And then lastly, there's a 0-foot setback requirement for the transit-oriented development overlay district that was approved recently. The proposed setback right now accounts for the existing city sidewalk. There is an existing sidewalk there now that is relatively wide that potentially, I think, probably fits the district that you may want to consider, just to allow for landscape green space or outdoor seating, things, and just a wider sidewalk in general. Those are the conditions that allow you to waive that if you're interested in doing that. And right now, the city is working with the applicant on an easement for right-of-way and utilities that are under that space, which is pretty standard. So those are generally the basic waivers that we discussed with the applicant. There's a few other conditions here that are just general, I think, site plan conditions that we work through with every applicant. So stormwater retention, part of the building and engineering submittal, that would have to be part of it anyway, and then finalizing the photometric plan. But just in general, this applicant's looking for site plan review for the 27 units in ground floor commercial mixed-use space. Generally, that's something that fits with the future land use from the old plan and the current master plan, and also some of the DDA plans as well. So if this board deems the site plan satisfactory, we could work with applicant on those conditions, and they would have to go through the Board of Zoning Appeals for a maneuvering lane variance.
So they have not gone to the ZBA yet?
Not yet. So that would be a condition going forward.
Right. Okay. Is that it for now?
That'd be it.
All right, thank you. Gentlemen, do you want to give us a...
Sure. Good evening. Thanks for having us back. Good job, Justin. We don't have much to say now. I'm kidding. My name is Jason Krieger with Krieger Clad Architects, Noah Dorfman, North Star Properties. And what we brought is a brief slideshow that'll assist in our presentation. We figure we can run through that with you. And then we're open for questions after that. So just a quick snapshot. It's a 4-story mixed-use building with a rooftop terrace. 27 apartments, 34 parking spaces, and roughly 2,000 square feet of commercial space. The site, as mentioned, is right on the corner of Bermuda and 9 Mile, right here. Lost on 9 is directly to the east. Public library is here. City Hall is further off to the east. Oh, there we go. So the existing site conditions right now, it's a vacant lot. And what you can see here is the city, this is actually the sidewalk, which is maintained by the city, but technically our property line is, I think it's only a foot or two off of the curb line right now. So that's why we're requesting that additional 8 foot back, is because we're actually maintaining what would be used as a city sidewalk for a pedestrian experience. This is our existing survey, just showing the boundaries. You can see right here, that dark line right there is indeed the property line. And that right there is the curb right there. So it's obvious at some point the sidewalk came out, and then in the interest of parking, this curb cut was created. This is our proposed site plan. It's a little hard to read because engineers don't care about graphics, but maybe I can show you. No offense if there's an engineer here. So this is our architectural site plan. This right here is our curb line around here. The blue represents the commercial space. The yellow represents our common areas for the residential up above. The shaded area right here represents the line of the building above with our columns. And what we're proposing is some parking off of the alleyway. We have you drive in right here off of Bermuda. You can turn right into parking spaces or left into the tandem parking spaces that would be dedicated for residential. We have a refuse room right here. This is very similar to Lost on 9, their other development across the street. We have a stairwell, and then a elevator to take you up to the residential. This is 2 and 3, floors 2 and 3 for the residential. We have 9 units per floor. The 4th floor steps back, so the balconies get larger. The idea is that as we go up, we're stepping the building back to create a little bit of relief for the pedestrians on the street. And then this here's our rooftop terrace. I believe it's about 2,400 square feet. Basically, we need two ways out, so we're just connecting the two stairways, and then we'll have a terrace. The terrace is stepped back a little bit as well. These are the elevations, so it's a mostly brick facade. We have a sample here of the brick color. There's metal siding up above, and the windows will be a clad aluminum. This is a view on Bermuda looking west, so the entrance is right here. You see how the building steps back in both ways. This is the view right on 9 Mile. And this is the view from the north looking south. This right here is a schematic building section we included just to show you the way that the building kind of steps back from the street and the massing of it. The center portion right here, that's the core element that goes up, that brings the elevator and the stairs up to the roof.
Can you speak more about the rooftop? Is that for residential use only?
Yes. It'd be considered common area. So in some way, they would have to manage that and make sure it's taken care of, probably hours up there, things like that. We have a few slides here that address some of the items that Justin spoke about. So this right here, I believe, was for the bike racks. That was one of the requests. We know we have room in here to incorporate a bike rack for people going to the shops or people who live there. We had to screen the parking, which is right along Bermuda, and the transformer, so we did that. We're actually incorporating a green wall, if you will, so it could be a metal trellis. We could plant some Boston ivy in there. You don't need a lot in order to plant that, so we can create a pocket in that masonry wall, and I think it could be very cool. This right here just addresses the tandem spaces, so when you pull in, turn left, these would be for the 2-bedroom units. And this, I cannot read that. What is that for?
The maneuvering lane?
The maneuvering lane. So we're proposing 20 feet. Lofts on 9 directly across the street has 20 feet, a 20-foot maneuvering lane. It works for them. 24 is required by the city. Because it's going to be for residents and they'll be familiar with this space, I do not see any issues with the 20-foot maneuvering lane, so that's our proposal. Also, the 20-foot maneuvering lane allows us to get a little bit more retail or commercial space on the ground floor, so I think that's good as far as leasing up and getting good tenants in there.
Although, if I may through the chair, the maneuvering space has no impact on the retail parking, correct?
No retail parking.
Retail park, we're not proposing any retail parking on site.
But you're going to open retail space that'll require parking,
Right,
so it'll
that's
be
what the
on-street
waiver is
parking.
Right, that's,
That's one of the things they're requesting.
Correct, yeah.
so the parking will have, is it restricted, like there'll be like you need,
Yeah, we'll control the parking, whether it's with a gate. It'll likely be a gate. Off the alleyway, I think it's going to be more signage.
Right.
Will have to be, and just policing it. This right here just this is the entrance into the apartments. That right there is the overhead door with the refuse. And then we're just showing the example across the street for the lofts on 9. It's something I don't think it's noticeable. They keep it very clean. It's tidy. I don't see it as being a nuisance. The dumpster inside I think is great because we have a trash chute. So the tenants they don't have to take their trash across the site to go anywhere else. It's very neat, clean, and orderly. I think it's something that actually will be a benefit. And then this is the other requested waiver for our, I think it was 8'6", if I remember right, something like that. Basically what we're doing is we're trying to create more sidewalk here because otherwise the building would come up to this property line. And then these are just some images of the proposed development. The view along 9 Mile. Predominantly masonry, as I said, we'll have some metal panels. We'll have storefront windows. Material-wise, it'll mirror what they did over here, which is really nice. It's a good, substantial building. The goal is to have something that's, hardy and it's going to be there long after we're gone. There's the entrance in there. We're proposing some steel beams, some wood, so it feels a little more industrial. Just an image at night. So that is our presentation. We're available for questions.
If I may through the chair, so is your business plan intentional on that first floor use to be retail. We've got this language with liquor, or restaurant with liquor license possibility. Are you open to a restaurant with liquor license, or are you just looking at retail?
We haven't pursued it at all yet to find out what tenant would be interested in that spot.
Okay.
So we're just kind of leaving it open-ended. We wanted to hear from you what criteria you would want depending on what kind of business would go in there, but we're not sure what it will be.
Okay, thanks. Noah.
Okay. That's good for the presentation? You're all set?
Yeah, our
Okay.
presentation is done, so we're available for questions.
Okay. Okay, so just to be clear, so we have the 3 waivers that the planning commission is being asked to consider. Sidewalk situation, which is essentially city initiated.
Right.
The overhead door facing the road, which is mirroring what's already across the street. And then the parking waiver, which would be purely for the first floor mystery space, retail, office, restaurant. And historically, we've granted the office retail parking waiver request.
Correct.
And then the ordinance does require restaurants to do the parking in lieu.
Right. If they have the sale of alcoholic beverages.
So they don't have the sale of alcoholic beverages.
Like if it's Jersey Mike's.
Right.
If it's Jersey Mike's, then I can look what that parking calculation would be.
That was the 20, right?
You know, maybe like Cupcake Station or,
Right.
you know, something that's food related, but not necessarily. And I don't want to tie the hands of potential tenants that they could have.
Sure.
How did we handle that in the existing building when we had Torino on that first floor? They had no parking, I'm assuming, for that?
Prior to all that.
Right, but
Right.
I'm saying, so that situation
we had no
occurred,
parking.
and there was no parking for it.
Yeah, the exemption was still valid for the central business district at that time. The parking requirement for just regular restaurant is the same as if it were with alcoholic beverages. It's 1 per 100 square feet.
So the only time they would be required to pay in lieu would be for a restaurant use?
Right.
A restaurant with booze.
No?
No.
With or
Well-
without booze?
I thought we differentiated that.
It would still, I mean, the calculation is the same for both types of restaurant. Unless it's carry out only, then it's based on a service counter and number of employees.
Correct, but isn't it the alcohol component that kicks the paper
That-
spot
that-
in?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay. All right. Well, again, this came before us a couple months ago, so I know we kind of talked through some of the big picture items. I guess I'll open up for commissioners. Anyone have any questions, comments? Way to ask.
Yeah, through the chair, I've got a question about building height, and if we need to list this as a condition as well. So I know that the top of the, if I'm remembering, if I read this correctly, top of the building goes to 55, which is where we max out in the CBD, and the stairways come up then above that, but also the kind of the terrace roof, and I know it's not a full roof, but that sort of shade structure is also up above. So it's not necessarily just the shielding for the mechanicals. Do we need to add any type of condition
No,
allowing that?
that was one of my questions for the city attorney, and he
Okay.
clarified that the definition within the ordinance would cover that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. That was my only question.
Okay. Other thoughts or questions? I guess I'm kind of intrigued by that response. I mean, I'm all for it, the idea of it. I just look at the ordinance, the definition of building height from a flat roof says to the highest point of the roof surface. And so usually, you know, mechanical and, you know, elevator shafts and things of that nature are excluded, but we're getting into essentially a bonus space up top of usable area, which is essentially an outdoor story. And again, I'm all for the use of it. I just try to understand how it meets our definition. But if our city attorney is comfortable with it, we should be comfortable with it. But just make a note, we should probably clarify that when we.
on the list of master plan zoning ordinance updates for sure.
Okay. Other thoughts, questions on this? I know, again, when we talked about this last time, it's kind of a logical extension of what's across the street and the exact type of uses that we want to see to kind of beef up the residential in our downtown. I think it looks really nice.
Through the chair, if I could. What's the total leasable space in the, that front portion there, the commercial space?
It's almost 2,000 square feet.
Give me an idea what type of viable uses could go into that space, or what you're thinking? I mean, we're dealing with this thing with the master plan. In the city in general, where we're becoming this entertainment district, and one of the balances is bringing, work life and job spaces to the downtown, and I like the project a lot, but I'm just wondering what type of business or what type of place that could maybe create jobs as well here, because we're taking a lot of the footprint of downtown that's right in that walkable area. So I just didn't know if you guys thought.
Restaurant would probably provide the most jobs out of any of those proposed uses.
Right, but we're trying to balance the downtown as well. And I didn't know if you guys had thought about that, or if you had any
We are
ideas.
just open to it, and we are, we're not planning on opening a business there. So we're going to seek out a broker, and, it's really going to be the market, who's interested in that spot in that location.
Okay.
Through the chair, question for Justin, I guess the canopy or the overhang over the right-of-way, so I know they're not 100% at the property line, it looked like there's just a sliver, but, so they're building out over the right-of-way, is there any special review of that needed, or?
Yeah, those awnings would have to be reviewed. I guess they would either be reviewed as part of the building permit process, or if there's proposed logos on top of those for businesses, then it would be the sign permit and building permit.
I think our intention is just to have signage on the brick, but to keep the awnings more of a uniform look, similarly to what we did across the
Okay. Yeah, so those would be covered in the building plan process.
And generally, in the past, when we've had awnings hang over right-of-ways, usually the recommendation will be to hold them, 10 or 12 feet off the ground. There's certain clearances that we'll get, usually from engineering,
Yeah.
will tell us, so we'll adhere to those rules.
And I think 8'6" is the minimum, I think.
Is it?
Thoughts or questions? Otherwise, we'll look for a motion.
I would move.
Oh, I'm sorry. We do have one comment
Oh,
from the
I
public.
apologize.
I apologize as well. I meant.
I actually have a question. After the shops at Camborne were built, I'm more aware of where utilities and meters are, so I'm curious to know where these will be located.
Okay. Thank you.
So right now, let's see if I can go to the site plan. We have a proposed location for the transformer, which would be, this thing's just taking a while to go through slides, in the northeast corner of the site, which is right here. That's our proposed location. If we have to, if for some reason it makes more sense, we can locate it over here, but it'll be somewhere off the alley. Gas meters will be on the building, but any kind of site utilities that will be out there will be off the alley.
Through the chair, would the meters be visible from the sort of pedestrian right-of-way, or would they also be off the alley?
No, actually, the meters, we'll likely locate them somewhere
Internal?
under the building. Yeah, we'll hide those.
Yeah, I hate those meters too.
Yeah, they're a necessary evil for buildings, but I think we can hide them under the building.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Other thoughts, questions, or a motion?
I would move in the matter of 165 East 9 Mile Road, the Planning Commission approved the site plan based on plans dated, received by the Planning Department on September 15, 2016, with the findings and conditions as enumerated in the motion. Okay.
We have a motion, do we have support?
Support.
Okay, we have a motion and support. Keep in mind this evening, we do have two motions on this. We do have the site plan, and we also have the parking reduction, which is a separate motion. Any discussion on the motion?
I will just say, I like the idea of the project. I'm not comfortable with the parking situation, so I'm not going to support either motion.
I also like the idea of this project, but I think what we're seeing here is a really nice project that we all like the looks of, but I think it's failing to incorporate a true mixed-use feature that could be viable. When I think about that area of downtown, I think it's missing a lot of storefronts and a lot of diversity in the type of storefront. And I think if there was a way that we could build in parking, maybe at a level, whatever, that we could get more viable space for mixed use, I would be more on board with this project.
Can I just say something about that? Right now in Lofts on 9, we have 2 vacancies. You know, it's not that easy to find very good tenants to come off of like this main Woodward corridor. So it's very easy to get, you know, really good national tenants on Woodward who have the staying power. And it's not as easy, especially on this East 9 Mile part where you don't have the same foot traffic, to get that kind of retail.
If I may,
The guys who are east of us, their rates are much, much lower than what's needed in a newer property. So that's why we were trying to reduce our risk in a way of having this while creating enough parking for the project.
If I could in response.
Yeah.
And that's maybe my concern as I look at the spaces that were created under Lofts on 9, and there's a limiting feature there, I think, with the size. A lot of businesses need more space or
Like
different
how much
space.
Are you thinking?
And that, I don't know exactly, but it doesn't seem like that space configuration worked there as well as planned. And that's why I asked if you guys looked into, before planning that space, what types of businesses maybe you could approach and you could attract with a space that's set to, maybe it's an office, maybe it's a specific need that the community has, and that's why I think if there was more space there or a continued downtown front walkway with either shops or something, it would connect the stores in the 9 all the way to the end, to Como's there. Right now, there's a gap.
We did propose originally to work with the city on a project that would have incorporated that parking lot and our property, that would have brought retail all the way from that alleyway of Como's to Bermuda. But unfortunately, at that time, the city of Ferndale was not interested, and they turned us down. But that was our intention, was trying to create this, you know, ongoing movement towards this East 9 Mile. Unfortunately, with that parking lot there, you do create this large gap.
if I may through the chair, if it's such difficult to lease the spaces you have on East 9 already, how are you feeling about the viability of this project?
I think that it's viable because I think with one good tenant, instead of having, you know, 6 or 10 or trying to create, you know, an environment like that, that there's a much better possibility to find one really good tenant.
Okay.
And I think it's also, you know, that downtown is evolving, right? We're seeing even our next discussion item, activity shifting down the corridor, and, you know, the restaurant opening across the street, and there's been, you know, things happening on this side that over time, I think, that'll even out a little bit more than it is currently. Okay, so we have a motion on the table and a support. Is there further discussion from anyone?
I'll just point out that by having this additional residential over here, we're increasing the level of foot traffic that we're going to have over on the east side of 9 Mile. And the more we increase the foot traffic that's going to be right along this corridor here, the more likely it is that these empty spaces at the street level are going to be considered to be viable commercial spaces. I'm less concerned about the parking situation specifically because we have a city-owned lot right across the street that provides a fair amount of off-street parking in addition to the parking that's along 9 Mile right here. So while I typically don't like the idea of waiving essentially all of the parking that would be required for commercial space, especially when there's a chance that a restaurant could go in there, and that means waiving a lot more spaces. on balance, I think increasing the density over on the east side here and driving more development onto the east side of Woodward is worth it.
If I may, through the chair, I agree with the density argument 100%. I think until there is a final solution to more comprehensive parking, though, that city lot next to it is maxed out for many days of the week. And so that's where my uncomfort level lies here. So, I mean, I respect your opinion. I hear you. And I like the idea to be able to do a project like this. I just don't think we're there.
All right. Further discussion? Let's go ahead and take a roll call vote on this, please.
Commissioner Czar?
Yes.
Farr?
No.
Casca?
Yes.
Baker?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Williamson?
Yes.
Brazen?
Yes.
Martin?
No.
Rodiger?
Yes. Okay. The site plan motion passes. We still, again, have the issue of the parking reduction. And again, so this is for essentially up to 8 spaces as drafted, which would essentially accommodate any retail or office use. But when it gets into any type of a restaurant use, then that would trigger a payment in lieu of, which, do we remember roughly what that is, the rate of that is at this point?
Yeah, it's $5,000 per space for the first 5, $4,000 for the next 5, and then I think $3,000 for the next 10.
So for 12 spaces, that would equate to $51,000.
For 12.
For 12 spaces,
Yes. Yes.
would equate to $51,000.
That goes to the parking fund.
That would go towards the city's parking fund, if a restaurant were to be proposed.
Basically, at that point, you're making it so there is no restaurant that's going to go there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you guys don't need to worry about that part of it, because no one's going to spend $75,000 on parking spots for a 2,000 square foot restaurant.
I would make a motion if we're.
Go for it.
I would move in the matter of 165 East 9 Mile Road, the Planning Commission approve the reduction of parking requirements based on plans dated received by the Planning Department on September 15, 2016, due to one or more of the following findings and subject to the following conditions as enumerated in the motion. Support.
Okay, we have a motion and support. Discussion? All right, seeing none, let's go ahead and do the roll call vote once again.
Farr?
No.
Casca?
Yes.
Baker?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Williamson?
Yes.
Brazen?
Yes.
Martin?
No.
Azar?
Yes.
Rodiger?
Yes. Okay. Congratulations, good luck.
Thank you very much.
You guys looking to do anything before the end of this year, or this is more of a spring start for you?
Spring start.
Good deal. Thanks.
Thank you.
We still have to look at a variance.
That's true, you still have to get a variance.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, next up this evening, we have a call to audience. Is there anyone, oh, I'm sorry, discussion items. Just kidding. Next up, discussion items. We have an item for 371 to 475, essentially a block on east.
Not before discussion.
Discussion items, number 6.
SC5 is called audience and opposed to the agenda.
Online it is. Do we
Yeah,
have
nice.
something different on our table?
Okay, call the audience. Where did I just see that?
I will.
Sure.
Call the
Yeah, it
audience
is.
discussion items.
Yep, it's on the
Website?
on the website. Is 5, call the audience. Okay, sir, please state your name and your address.
Robert Chad, 37 Investor. And I can't say I'm here speaking for the city. These projects are fantastic. They're what you want. They're what we all want. They're what the residents want. This one is a little bit different. And I'm speaking not only for my block, just myself, but this is going to change things for my block quite a bit, and I'd like to show you how. our block of residents, I think I am the second newest person there, and I've been there over 20 years. I bought it from the daughter of the man who built it before the WAB was even open. I've got to see this whole thing. It's a defining great thing of my life. And I want to say that I'm not going to try to make a full case. I'm going to try to show something here that goes against what I believe is Ferndale's core values in their actual zoning. I'm not against density. I'm not against traffic. I'm not against even improved more light pollution or noise. I understand that's part of living where I live. When the credit union one went up and took my privacy away, didn't say boo. I understand. I know how it goes. They deserved it, you know. Unfortunately, they put me in a standing wave pattern until internet radio. All I could listen to was WCSX. But other than that, I made it through. But I don't even mind my house being 100 feet from a wall of people watching me. These are all things that are part of living where I live. I want to talk about the dog run, but first I want to show you this. This is a winter's day shadow that this building will cast. I want to show you where I am. I'm right there. I'm at the beginning of the angle and the end of the angle. Between November and middle of February, I get a couple hours of light. These people are also affected. I wish I could speak for them. I don't know how interested they are. But certainly in terms of property values and stuff, this does nothing for me but kill me. You know, it is a wall. I don't even really care about the wall. I care about the blocking of my light and my sun. I care about depression. I care about, let me tell you what I care about. In section 18.6, which is the standards for review of the BZA, the first point, A, and the first point of A is to consider if the action proposed will impair adequate supply of light and air to adjacent properties, increase the danger of fire, unreasonably diminish or impair established property values within the surrounding area. Hey, the surrounding area is going to do great. My block's going to die. Or in any other respect impair the public health. I want to talk about that dog run just for a minute. Comfort, welfare, quality of life, my sky, you know. And B, the action proposed will be compatible with adjacent uses, height, location, size, and character, will be in harmony with the appropriate and already development of the surrounding neighborhood. Now we have a situation where a central business district is southernly located from a residential. Now these other buildings, I love them. I love what this looks like. They even put a setback in the back. They open up. They don't have to do that. It's just the facade that has to do that, you know. What is that? Problem doing notes in your seat. But I think the height and location needs to be revisited to the point where I think that any reasonable person would look at this and say something is wrong. Something needs to be looked at again. And I think this project needs to be held a little bit while somebody, I guess me, makes a case, the appropriate, you know, whoever sees this, the BZA, if it's the city council, it's whatever, to perhaps lower in this situation the maximum height by 15 feet, to perhaps have a major setback. I think that this situation is different than the other situations, and I would like to see if we can't properly amend the verbiage before it's approved to not throw us into eternal darkness. Now, this is winter. You know, this is worse. This is Christmas Day. I use Christmas Day. You know, so it's the worst case scenario, but it's going to be months of this. And I almost want to leave it at that because I think a reasonable person would say, yeah, we need to look at this. But while I'm up here, I want to talk about the dog run, which will exist 50 feet from my back gate, which the access control I see on the plan will do nothing to keep people from using it. In a town where there's a park far away that people pay to use, how many people are going to use this park? What's going to happen with the rats? Are we going to build a huge cinder block wall and a rat wall and let the dogs poop in that? Are they going to have a dedicated person to clean that up? And just, you know, as an aside, in terms of quality of life, not the best alarm clock, you know, 5:30 every morning, a bunch of dogs barking, everybody radiating off the building, reflecting back, you know, to our block. And that is pretty much all I really have to say. And I'd like the opportunity to go further with it, to find out where I need to go further with it, to make a better case for it, and to help the city say, in this particular case, when this happens in front of this, these are the rules, instead of the 50 feet and no setback in the rear.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time and your service to the city. I do appreciate what you.
All right, thank you. And just to clarify, I'm assuming just to clarify, you're talking about the next item on the agenda, which
That's
is the
correct.
discussion item.
I should have
for the
opened with
mulch.
that. I'm
That's
talking
okay.
about the, yes, exactly.
And so this project, you know, again, is on the agenda this evening as an introduction to this commission. I've this is our first news of this development. There's no action this evening. This is purely to introduce the project, to get initial comments, thoughts, feedback. So I think it's good that you came here this evening to get your initial thoughts out before anything is officially submitted to the city, because as of yet, nothing has been officially submitted, an application, fees paid, things of that nature.
I understand, which is why I wanted to get started. As soon as I found out this happened, there was a counter development across the street that was kind of, the garages were in front, and we got to it after it was approved. Very,
Yes.
very difficult. In the end, the lawyers said, yeah, let them build, and they did, and life is fine. But this one, the light and air thing really matters. We even used that for the other one. Did it matter? This one, yeah, you're going to destroy a block.
So I would just encourage you to make sure to stay in touch with the Community Development Department, and obviously, when this comes forward, I'm not sure if there are any public hearings.
Which name can I get my contact information to?
Sign in the back of the room, and they'll make sure to notice you anytime any meetings on this topic come up.
Okay.
And we
Thank
did speak briefly before, but I'll follow up.
Yes, thank you for
Absolutely
your
follow
help.
up with you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you for your comments. And then take Justin, or Jordan's as well. Okay. Are there any other call to audience, people who would like to address the commission? Okay. Seeing none, we'll go to item 6, discussion items for 371 to 475 East 9 Mile Road, multiple family development. Again, Justin, if you want to go ahead and give us a introduction to this project before we hear from the applicant.
Sure. So we are talking about 371 to 475 East 9 Mile Road. Just a concept plan's been submitted. The applicant had spoken a few times with staff just about development going on in the city, and the need for housing that diversified housing that we were exploring through the master plan and was referenced in the previous plan. But eventually the applicant had obtained purchase agreements for the block of parcels there previously currently held by the Credit Union 1. This is in the Central Business District. The current proposed plans, no official site plans have been submitted yet, but include 112 apartment dwellings, studio to 2-bedroom units. They did offer some amenities that weren't really, I think, provided or haven't been provided previously, with a rain garden and dog run and outdoor seating area. And as the applicant will probably tell you, that they're trying to cater to millennials and some of the interests in their interests there. This development's 4 stories, proposed to be 4 stories, with about a 3,000 square foot commercial space on the ground level, facing Leland Street. The site's unique in that some of the previous properties, multifamily developments, weren't able to provide all of their needed parking on site. This development has additional parking for some of the 2-bedroom units for a total of 139 parking spaces, which would be inclusive of the commercial space that's proposed as well. There's also, similar to the last property discussed, some interesting former property lines from previous years, in that the easement, there's a easement line and property line that sort of adjusts as you go further east on these parcels. So the proposal includes relocation of a concrete sidewalk, and actually adding some on-street parking spaces that could possibly be available to the city's parking system. So that's kind of a further discussion. But a sidewalk would remain and continue that connectivity that goes towards east and west 9 Mile. As I mentioned, the site does include some landscaped areas proposed. Right now, the site, there's not really much landscaping. It's some buildings and a lot of impervious surface. So stormwater retention plans would be part of any engineering submittal, as with any plans that we look at. So those would be forthcoming. We also talked initially just about the waste receptacles. I think right now face public streets. Those would be turned around, and then talked about breaking up the ground level facade a bit and offering up some variety. So those were just general, concept discussions, but the applicants wanted to get some feedback from the commission, and they probably can provide some more detail as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, if the applicant's here, you could introduce yourself and the project. Anything else you want to add?
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Mike Dowdle, partner in Wolf River Development Company, my partner Dale Inman, and our architect Jeff Scott. Basically, our target audience is young, working, you often hear the phrase millennial. What we have found after surveying all of Southeast Michigan is nearly all of the new apartment developments that are being built would be classified as luxury, high-end, with high rents. Our goal is to come one step down. We would have granite counters, washers and dryers, all appliances, all the things that the others would have, but we're trying to do this in a way that our rent will be a little bit more reasonable, and we think that would make us very competitive with the Royal Oak and the Midtown stuff, all of which is very high-end rents. We intentionally added the dog park. That would be fenced with a double gate, as I'm sure you're familiar with, for people to go into, and that would be restricted to tenants only. There would be a full-time person on the site to manage that and any other things that are going on. If you notice on our plan, we show a leasing office, 2 offices, and there would be a full-time person there all the time. The green space, which Dale will discuss further, changes the site so that less than 4 or 3% of the site is green, or almost 20% of the site is green. And that's the rain garden that we would sheet flow the parking lot water into that. Approximately half of the parking on the site would be under the building. The building would be, as I said, dog-friendly, and if you look into that a little bit, our target audience, approximately 1/3 of all these millennials have pets, and we want to cater to that. You just recently did a dog park, and I think you're probably aware of what's going on with that group. I think I'll let Dale come up, talk about the site in detail.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name's Dale Inman, like Mike said, with Wolf River Development. Justin, is it possible to get one of our site plans up on the screen? Or- Get that one. As he's doing that, though, as Mike said, there's 139 parking spaces on site. That's, thank you. 139 parking spaces on site. We have 112 apartments, so we're about 1.25 above that. And if we have 3,000 square feet of retail, and if it was retail, it would be, what's that, 12 spaces. If it's office, it's 10 spaces. So we exceed the parking requirements. As Mike said, 79 spaces are underneath the building, and the rest of the spaces are outside of the building. And the site is in this direction is 123 feet deep, and our building is approximately 60 feet deep, so it goes a little less than half of the site in the depth of it. And right now, with the 4 stories under the zoning ordinance, we're allowed 55 feet, and subject to final details and heights of the apartments themselves, will be around 50 feet tall. But we'll be going only halfway back on the site. The green space that Mike mentioned, this area in here, it's about 2 or 3% now, and when we're done, it'll be in excess of 15, closer to 20%. And the first flush of the parking lot can go in there, so that'll be a cleanup factor. 1,700 square feet, or probably 1,500 square feet here and 1,500 here for leasable space. And then, as Mike said, the leasing space will be in the middle. We do have 14 tandem spaces. We have 7 here for 14 spaces there, and 7 over here for 14 spaces there. So if you backed off 14 of those spaces that are tandem, from 139, you're still with 125 parking spaces for the apartments. And the idea is, right now, we're planning 29 apartments that are 2 bedrooms, and those 2 bedrooms likely would be interested in those tandem spaces because it's easy for them to coordinate, pulling out the car that's deeper. In the corners here, this area and over here, we have the ability for 26 bikes on each side for a total of 52 spaces for bike parking. The other thing that's unique about this site is the street along 9 Mile. We're proposing pulling that back 9 or 10 feet and building parallel parking, and we're thinking like 14 of those spaces would be dedicated to the city, and we'd like to ask for 2 of those to stay back for our leasing office for future tenants to come in when they're possibly renting an apartment from us. And the other 14 spaces really could be dedicated for any type of commercial use, whether it's office or service, or whether it was retail there. It would be benefiting that space in that area. And I think I'll stop there. Like Justin said, the trash compactors, we've got them going the other way across the alley. We could flip them around like he asked. And I'll stop there. And what I'd like to do is introduce our architect, Jeff Scott, who can talk through a little bit more about the building we're proposing. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate the communities having these introductory meetings. I think you get a lot accomplished and make sure everybody's on the same page. So I want to thank you for your time tonight. Where do you go about?
If you just hit the right or left arrow, that'll go through the site plan.
Oh, okay.
And the renderings in the back.
All right. Thanks. I think Dale pretty much looked at all the site issues. I did want to reinforce that this heavy line right along at this point is the back edge of the building. So we have pulled it to the south. Really is significant. We didn't return it. We looked at some other options of actually returning it, but we thought this was a much a better solution overall for this site. And then we did have access control as we enter for the internal parking spaces. The ones that would be marked would be the ones off the alley back there. I believe there's 34, something like that.
So just so I understand you correctly, so you're saying the spaces under the building would be like gated?
Right. We would actually gate right at this point.
Okay, and what about the alley ones? Those would be open to anyone?
And, well, this would be open, but we would mark those as private.
Assign them?
Mark them?
Assigned to individual tenants.
So all of your parking is exclusively for the residential?
Well,
I thought you
I
have a
believe
retail
some will be allotted for any commercial use that we would have for the 2 retail spaces.
Okay.
Here's the building elevation along the front. It's a little hard to read. What we've got are here's the lower level with the parking. We've got areas in here where there's the retail at the ends and the leasing space. We've created some openings in that similar to a window, but there probably wouldn't be any glass, but it allows that. We have landscaping. And then these larger areas here, what I anticipate is that we'd actually have almost like a green wall going up, where we'd encourage landscaping to go up. So as a pedestrian was walking by, that heat island effect of a facade of a building, we can help minimize that and then create some color and some interest as you move along the site. In the back, you can see this would be open for parking. We do, I want to jump back to the front. Again, maybe we get to the renderings, it's a little easier to just talk about where we have introduced some balconies, so some of the units will actually have some balconies along the front. Conceptual floor plan. This is typical for the 2 floors, stairwells on each end, the center core, then with the combination of studio apartments, 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units. As you can see by the plan, we've undulated the facade, which breaks up that long mass and kind of creates some, we think it creates some nice interest. We do have, we've carved out a space up on the upper level, an outdoor terrace area for the residents, and that would be just on that westerly end. And here's one of the renderings. This is the look as you're looking to the east along 9 Mile. We've got introduced a couple of small balconies here, but here you can see where we've dropped with the undulation of the building and carving out a little piece of that also to create some outdoor space for the residents. We think that it gives a nice variety of types of units, amenities to the units. We think there's some, with that variety, we think it'll make it a very viable project. And then here's a look to the rear, where we've got there are no balconies on the other side, but we do have some undulation on the outside, almost giving it a row house effect with these little raised, the small parapets up above. We've got some sort of masonry at the lower level, as far as on the as far as the base material. So as pedestrians or whatever, that'll be a masonry. Whether it's, we're not sure if it's going to be a burnished block, something that's more in keeping. That's still under development right now. And then up above would be probably a pre-finished siding. We're looking at, right now, we're looking at something that's a wood product that's comparable, that we feel that it's comparable to like the hardy board siding, the horizontal siding, those type of things. It's a lot more, being wood, it's fairly eco-friendly, and also being able to manipulate that product is a little easier. I mean, you can actually cut it with the saw a lot easier. So this is a product that we're kind of excited to utilize. And then we're going to use different types. We've got some lap siding, some vertical siding, and then interact that with the various color. So at that point, I don't think we had, that was about it.
That was it.
So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. I guess we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. One question I just want to ask, I know we haven't officially done a review of this.
Right.
I'm sure you've had discussions. Generally, and I guess this is both for applicant and city, in terms of just initially, in terms of setbacks, building height, the basic principles, I guess, of massing for the site, does it meet our ordinance requirements?
Correct.
So there's no variances requested
The only
for the essentially bulk
no.
of the,
Right.
the massing?
Right.
Through the chair, no further action would be required for those parking spaces.
The only portion that would need discussion would be the back row, because there is separation from residences there. But that's something that the planning commission has the ability to waive if there's a need for it.
pretty similar to what was just approved this evening with the parking spaces backing out to the alley.
Correct. And similar to the Ferndale House property as well.
Right. Okay. Just initially, I think, the uses, I think generally, we're looking to increase the density and have residential and mixture of uses. One of the first things that kind of caught me is, I think the city's first choice is never going to be a parking on the first floor. We like to see active street fronts and have uses that engage the public on the street front. So the experience of walking along this building seems like you're essentially walking down a very, very, very long 500-foot wall. It doesn't engage the public in any way. Was there discussion about having more active first floor uses? Right, we do have a parking structure across the street that is vastly underutilized. Was there a discussion about more active uses on the first floor?
When we started with the site, we looked at a lot of different things, but basically we're interested in developing the apartments. And no, I think there's a couple spaces at either end that would be probably either service or office, is what we anticipate. But in order to accomplish what we want in terms of the pricing of the apartments, and in order to get the lending that we need, we really can't run storefronts all along there.
Well, additionally, the property is owned by Credit Union, which has the 6-story building across the street, and they have a high vacancy in that building. It's not fully utilized, so it concerned us when we thought, gee, an office building across the street, if we try to do retail this far away from Woodward, that was a concern. If we try to do office on the ground floor, the fact that that 6-story building has high vacancy also concerned us. And what we tried to do with Jeff's plans is open that up where there are openings along that wall, so it's not a canyon, if you will, but there's openings even though there are no shops behind portions of that. Does that help?
I hear what you're saying. Just, I know that personally one of the concerns I'm going to have is about taking out a whole block of frontage on our main street in our downtown and using it for parking. And the credit union example you gave about being not fully functional or not being fully used right now, are they even opening that up to anyone else to lease? I thought it was just Credit Union 1.
I don't think they can.
Yeah, I mean,
because
it's
of
not
their
like
bank
anyone,
status
it's not
and
like
they
it's
can't-
sitting vacant on the market. I mean, that's just Credit Union 1 isn't fully utilizing its building. I don't think it's open for other people to sublet space of the credit union.
And I can't answer that directly,
Yeah,
but
so
they
that's not
are
a good
bringing
apples.
the Chamber of Commerce and some of that stuff that's on this site into their building. So what the rules are on their building, I'm not sure. I'm not aware of a restriction.
I'm not aware of it being open for the market to comment on, but,
Through the chair, related to parking, I guess, I have a concern about the impact that the traffic would generate in this area on the adjacent residential streets and on 9 Mile. I mean, I would just like to see some investigation into what that would be.
Yeah, I think the challenge we have as a city related to parking is, I think we have to provide a certain amount, and so that's what I think a lot of the projects that come through our doors that we talk about. It's kind of finding the balance of providing enough parking so it doesn't affect the neighbors around. But then if you ask for a waiver that's too much or get into payment in lieu territory, then it can make the project falter. So it's kind of the balance I think we've seen with a lot of projects that have came through the door lately. So I can see why that the safest bet would be to provide the most parking as they can on site. But yeah, I think all of these concerns are valid.
well, and then going back to the parking that you talked about, kind of the alley parking being accessible to the retail, it doesn't seem like that's very convenient retail parking.
I really expect it's more likely going to be service or potentially office there.
Either way, service or office, the main doors are kind of oriented
Yeah.
on the other side of the building, and the closest parking spaces would be kind of the ones right off of Leland, seems like those would make more sense, instead of having the ones centrally. There's no, imagine to get to those offices, there's not a connection interior to the building, right? So we'd have to go around the exterior.
You could dedicate parking spaces in this area, right in here and along here for the commercial, and then the spaces back here could be assigned to the apartments. Sure, that's true. And then, the parking spaces along 9 Mile that would be created also could be used for that. That's what we've tried to
That has to be determined,
accomplish.
because you said earlier that they were going to be gated specifically for the residents kind of at the road. So we'd have to think about how you'd regulate the use of those spaces.
Right.
Separating the residential
Yeah,
from the businesses.
Sure.
What, I think the business, though, like employees, if it's an office use, if it's an office use, they'd have a card key or however you'd have to get into that protected area, because if you're in an office, you'd like to have that guaranteed spot fairly close to your office. So, I see a very reasonable, these spots and these spots, depending on, and then vice versa on the east side, just depending on the type of user that you'd pull in, you could dedicate, because we do have a little bit of flexibility with the number of spots, what gets allocated and where. But I always kind of envisioned that. Wouldn't anticipate, an office, employee parking way off the alley, and then whatever walk-in customers they may have, they're, what they just use the city spots, or do you require, those type of, that scenario that you've got it dedicated?
That's what I'm saying, it's a customer parking on your site.
Well,
Yeah,
you have to move the gate.
Yeah, we could move the gate. There's 4 or 5 spaces here. You could assign a few more here. So it's very manageable. You could do the same thing on the other end.
Are there thoughts on parking, kind of
Yeah.
since we're in the topic of parking?
Through the chair, I've got parking questions. I'm very, very familiar with this block. I helped found the free clinic that's moving. So glad to see you here. Very sad my clinic is moving, but also very familiar with, happily we're only moving 3 blocks, but also very familiar with Credit Union 1 and their parking structure, because we work with them very closely. And with that parking structure, I know that they're very protective of that parking structure for insurance reasons, but you guys are a big development outfit. I imagine you're well insured. Is there an interest? I'm wondering about parking. I mean, parking across the street at the credit union is probably almost as close as some of these parking spaces along the back. And was there an interest or space in your business model to have additional, retail or office on the first floor there? And was it the parking that was holding you back, or was it just not a part of your business model to have that there? Because I'm just thinking about shared parking with the credit union in that giant 3-floor structure that is constantly underutilized, and how that might benefit you guys across the street.
We've never had any indication from them about their willingness to give us access to that. We talked to them a little bit about letting us use it during construction, so we didn't have the laborers parking on the street.
Yeah.
They will consider it.
Okay.
But no firm. Our goal, as I said in the beginning, is to find a niche for first-class apartments at a little bit lower rate. Figures from this past year, about 70% of the apartments being built now are all luxury, high-end, very expensive apartments. And we think the niche is here, and that has to do with how much non-apartment space we put across the front, how many parking spaces we have. This all revolves around that goal, because we think that's where the niche is. There's going to be plenty more stuff built for $2,000 a month and that kind of thing. We're not looking for that at all. And it's really the economics that drive what we've designed.
In that case, just to make sure that you're aware, Justin and Jordan, there was an existing shared parking agreement with the credit union and with Black Owl. Were you aware of that one?
Yes,
Okay.
that was just after I started, but, and so my understanding is that Credit Union One does have space shared for them in that surface lot in front there.
Okay, that's great. So we're not now creating an even tighter fit for the restaurant that'll be right next door and then potentially jamming up your parking.
Right.
That was my other question about parking. I have
Really,
more
the
questions
biggest
about
thing that
parking.
we learned as we came to town and explored what the desires of the community was parking. That parking was the biggest problem you face, and we really tried to run this project to address that concern.
And just to chime in, initial conversations, we did talk about, the preference for mixed use and things like that. So it's not that it wasn't discussed, it was just a matter of, I think, the parking discussions and the economics of what they're going for. And so it at least was covered initially.
You talked about at the beginning, maybe Justin did, that there was discussion about moving the dumpsters. Where were you talking about relocating them?
I think initially we talked about
Just the orientation.
the orientation of
They're
that.
orientated where the truck would empty them from the north, and we would turn those around where it would be from the south.
But essentially, you still have dumpsters right next to the sidewalk, right there at the
Yeah,
entrance.
It would be right here, it just would be rotated, so the opening would be this way.
I don't find much better. I mean, it's a little better from the residents'
I'm-
perspective.
I mean, it's at the alley location.
Yeah, it's still a very prominent location that's visible and very adjacent to residential, or I'm sorry, pedestrian.
It's in a structure that's enclosed.
When they close the gates when they're done. Always do.
Are they supposed to?
That's been something code enforcement's been focusing on, so.
Okay. Are there other questions on parking or access?
More questions, not on those.
Yeah. I'm sorry, on what?
Not on those
Okay.
topics.
Let's go back maybe to the building, the massing, the questions, I guess, comments on that, if people want to talk about that. So the parking on the first floor is kind of what you're proposing. You're not willing to entertain any type of other uses other than the corner kind of caps. I would hope that if you proceeded with that route, that you would maybe talk with Justin and talk about kind of what the stuff we did through Ferndale House, with some art installations, and I like you mentioned living wall, but ways to engage those that are walking by with seating and visual elements that may change, and the green wall, so that again we're not just walking along a parking structure for 500 feet.
Justin educated us about that, and we said, sure, we're glad to work with, to make it more visually interesting.
Okay. Could you talk a bit more about the roof? You mentioned there was going to be a communal space. Did I hear you say that up at the one end,
Yeah, right on the,
right that corner?
on the west end, you can see right here, we just terminated the upper floor at that point, and the roof terrace would be at this location. This little portion back here would actually be the stairwell that goes up.
And similar to the previous project, two means of egress would be required, and the fire marshal has very specific requirements for that.
Was there any other thought put into stepping back of that top floor, again, to try to create more light and air? As you get taller, a lot of times it's common to have that top floor step back, so that maybe they have maybe a patio in front, so that the shadow that's imposed isn't as,
What we did on this building that's different than the other two buildings previously, or at least the one tonight, we didn't put it on top the fourth floor. We left an apartment out on the fourth floor, so it's not really on the roof of the entire building. It's down one floor. It's above the third floor.
Yeah, I
And so
understand
it's
that. I'm
one
talking
lower.
about just in general, stepping the fourth floor back to create a less imposing mass of structure. It's very common in a lot of, if you look at some of the lofts in downtown Royal Oak and Birmingham, the other communities that have these larger buildings, that they step back the uppermost floor.
Right, and some of that has to do with how the construction would be, the economics of how it's going to actually get built. So when you start shifting and not carrying the bearing points along that same plane, you run into difficulty carrying the loads. We actually did that on another project up in East Lansing, and it wasn't easy. There was a lot of issues, and I don't know if the benefit was that much. Now, I mean, I'm willing to look at those solar angles and take a stronger look. You know, a lot of what we did do on purpose was to, you know, take that building and push it to the south as much as we can. But we still wanted to allow for a little bit of room where we're actually going to adjust the property line, the sidewalk location, so we can get those parallel spots out along 9 Mile that kind of benefit everyone. And then, you know, the building kind of sits. We wanted a little bit of buffer to get a little bit of green space in between the wall and the sidewalk. With then at the retail portions, then the sidewalk would widen and be able to go full length without any green space.
And just to clarify as well, if this parcel were adjacent to R1 or R2, it would be required
Right,
to step back,
right.
yes.
Right, that's what I'm getting at.
Okay.
It said it's pretty common to step back that top floor when you're adjacent to single-family detached homes.
In the.
Being that this is R3, it's not required, but, okay.
Understand.
Okay. got
Yep,
it.
I get it.
What's-
But the
what's-
intent
what's-
is it's still,
Right,
it's
no,
still a
yeah,
house,
I
whether it's
don't
R1 or R3.
Right.
What's the setback in the rear for this zoning?
Regardless.
I can check.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a question. Again, it's pretty fairly common practice to step back as you go up for residential, budding, single-family, low density next to you. But other, I guess, questions on massing or any comments?
I'm just curious about the history of your company. Do you or any of your partners currently own or operate anything in Ferndale today?
No.
Thanks.
You know, just to make sure on the parking, the 16 spaces in the front are not being counted in the 139.
Okay.
Yeah, through the chair. First, a question, it may be a question for Justin. There's a note on the drawings, I believe it relates to the corner that has the patio, and it says a portion of right-of-way to be dedicated to the developer. Is that another weird sidewalk glitch like we just dealt with?
It is.
Okay.
It is. So that's something that we would absolutely have
Okay.
to work out. This one is interesting in that we could acquire some on-street parking spaces and still have a wide enough sidewalk that it's in keeping with everything else, but it's open for discussion at this point.
Okay. We just talked about utilities with our last applicant. Would utilities be interior to the building? Would the meters be on the exterior? How would those be accessed and read?
We have a call in to ask for a meeting with the gas and electric companies, and we don't know that answer yet.
One of the things that I'm looking at, I work in Midtown, and one of the buildings that I think the City of Detroit Historic District Commission unilaterally wishes they had done something different with is the Studio One apartments. And one of the things that they dislike is the way that the facilities that are particular to each unit, so some of the air handling and other utilities, are really very visible and break up the front facade. And your front facade is lovely and clean, but I'm sure Studio One's was in their renderings too. So that's where my question comes from. Just some of the other large buildings that we've seen done recently have all of a sudden had sort of like air conditioning boxes and gas meters and stuff sticking out of the front of them because it wasn't closely attended to. Lesson learned in Detroit, but that was the impetus for that question. Also wondering, will there be any on-site storage for residents? I saw all the bike storage, which is fantastic, interior to the building. That'll be a great amenity. Any other storage, or is it really just in unit?
Well, it's possible, right now, we're thinking that this area over here will have a basement,
Ah, okay.
and the part of it will be where the utilities come in for the water and the sprinkler system. And then it's possible a small portion of that could be for some minor storage for tenants. But we won't do a basement over here. This is the area that had the old gas station on it.
Yes. I thought both corners had a gas station, actually.
Well, maybe.
Good luck. Could you talk a little bit about the materials that you guys are thinking about? You said you're still sort of deciding what that masonry will be on the bottom, but it would be something more decorative than just a block or a
Right.
contour block.
And it actually may be a combination where we'd actually want to highlight the more retail. But a lot of that we're looking at, a combination of split face block or burnish block. Are you familiar with that? And you can do some different things with coursing. I think that's kind of the palette we're looking at for that lower level as far as those materials. And then, as I mentioned, it would be the other pre-finished panels up above. And whether they've got some that's kind of a lap siding, and then there's some others that are horizontal accents, and others are larger panels. And what I'm anticipating is we'd use a combination of those. The larger panels may have some reveals in them to articulate some geometrics that fit within the building.
I was really happy to hear that it was panel and not EIFS or some other sort of inexpensive facade. I think you've got nice materials. I was just asking about the masonry units in particular because we do have some regulations around the percentage of masonry units that can face a right-of-way, but you had mentioned you were looking at different types of brick.
Fortunately, EIFS is prohibited as well, so.
Over
yeah,
10%. Yeah, that's why I was like, oh, did someone tell them? But it looks good. Are there balconies in back as well as in the front?
No.
Okay. And last of my questions, thanks for considering Ferndale.
Going back to the kind of building facade design, obviously it's a very long building, and I think the perspectives do it much better justice than your just elevations. I think those help
But
portray
you can see the
right. So
articulation.
based off the
on that
elevations,
wall.
I have very big concerns.
Yeah.
I think the perspectives were very helpful in showing the articulations, but it still is a very large, monotonous design. I mean, it's a long building that is replicating. You're having, apartments. One thought I had, and I don't know, is that in the central lobby area, if there's an opportunity to do something a little different, to maybe kind of make it kind of the main entrance, more use of glass, more use of something to make it stand out a little bit, and maybe not be so large and bulky, because you have opportunity there with the lobbies.
If you look, I'm not sure if I can blow that up, but if you look close at the main entry, we do have a fairly significant vertical, kind of a small marquee that runs up the face. So it kind of articulates that, it breaks that line up, and, it announces that's kind of where the main entry is. So we did, we've spent a lot of time on how to deal with just that entry and make it read strong, to let you know, but also to make it, pleasing and not too obtrusive. So, and I think, what we propose there with that, and again, that would not project out into the right-of-way. It would be all within our property line. And
Essentially, it's kind of like a large sign.
yeah, it's a large sign, or is it a vertical element? We just thought, okay, you can just get some good-sized letters and put the address on it, that type of thing. Something fairly simple. I don't anticipate this thing, you know, it's not neon and lit up and blinking, but
I guess my comment would just be to look at that lobby area, this area, you could maybe break up the brick and all the heavy material, something like lighter and airier or something to, again, kind of break it up a little bit more. And there's opportunity there because there's not units right there in that central.
Right.
And again, in looking at kind of the massing of it and talking about the stepping back of the, you know, the top floors or maybe breaking up the lobby, trying to, again, try to visually scale it back a little bit so it doesn't seem so bulky, if that makes any sense. That's just my comment. Other questions or thoughts?
Through the chair. A couple questions. Thank you for your interest in Ferndale, but does Wolf River Development have any other developments like this?
Over the last 6 years, we completed 3 buildings in East Lansing, all of them using the same concept, the parking under the building.
Okay. Now, given this is kind of in our central business corridor, is there any options that you guys are willing to look at to create business fronts on that first floor? Is that just a no-go for your development?
I would never say to you that we won't consider anything, and we'll go back and we'll think about it, but we think the economics are such that this was our best approach, again, to achieve the rent point that we're after. This is not low income or anything of that nature, but the kinds of things we're discussing this evening are all of what causes everything to be luxury apartments these days. You know, the 2,000 plus apartments. That's why we're trying to do it in a way, because we think that's a segment of the market that's not addressed, and we think there's some potential of problems down the road when all of the housing that's being built in this area at Southeast Michigan is a luxury. Eventually that's going to be an overbuild, and that's going to be a whole new problem, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
I understand the price point, and I like the price point that you guys are going for. What I'm failing to understand is the correlation between removing parking on the first floor and either elevating it or finding substitute parking and having to change that price point.
Well, here, some of the background information of the thought process. If we put a commercial space along here, and the retail people have said, you know, we're pretty far away from the main core of 9 Mile and Woodward. So retail gets a little riskier, the banks get more nervous, and it's harder to get a construction loan. And then if, on a practical standpoint from a site planning, these parking spaces are basically 20 feet off of the wall. And if to put a space in 20 feet deep is not, I mean, that's a very shallow, and it would have to be very long. Or normally you'd go 40 or 60 feet deep. That would be a lot of space along here, and it would take out a lot of parking spaces. And then how do you mitigate those parking spaces? And the real financial driver is the 112 apartments. They're paying the freight, and the retail space is really dragging the project down, and that's what the underwriters at the bank would tell us. And so there would be a big concern about whether this project would be financially viable and whether we would be able to get a construction loan for it. And unfortunately, that's just the reality. And there's some things that have happened in the last few months with bank regulations that are requiring the banks to ask the developers to put more equity into the projects. And I suspect that some projects will be stalled and potentially have issues about until they can get that equity in the project. And that's a concern for some projects. And then if you add an additional concern about more commercial and retail, it makes the banks even more spooked.
Can I ask a question? You know, just along the lines of, and these guys will probably not be happy, what would you consider acceptable or desirable, more desirable? I mean, is it all the way across the front and then you defeat the purpose of the podium, you know, the benefits of the podium parking? Or is it just do we increase a couple of those, instead of 1,600, do we increase the ends a little bit? What is the thought process here? If we go redesign, reconfigure everything, I'm just trying to work this process through in my mind, having gone through a number of scenarios of what will drive it, what will not. It may get to a point where, oh, well, no, I've got to have retail along the whole front, or you won't be satisfied. And I'm afraid that would really hurt the project. So,
If I may? First of all, thank you for looking at Ferndale for a project of this size and magnitude. I do appreciate the undulation of the building and so on. This is in the CBD, which is Central Business District, and the real intent of that is to have that continuous business retail and offer that at a pedestrian level. There's, high-density housing areas and so on, but this tries to marry the two. I don't want to be short-sighted. We've done a lot of street improvements on 9 Mile, making it more pedestrian, making bike lanes, so I don't think we need to say we can't do any retail there, because it's going to happen. If it keeps improving and the neighborhoods get stronger, they're going to be coming from Hilton toward Woodward. There's going to be that on-street presence. So to ask, how much or how little, I think we need to go all out and really consider this in the CBD as prime retail frontage. So I'd have a hard time supporting a blank wall. I think the building is turning out nicely with form and massing. It is, could be broken down a little bit more, but I don't think the first floor does any justice to the kind of central business district that we're promoting across 9 Mile from end to end. The rendering, it's got a lot of trees in front of that first floor. I think we did a little bit of, I'm not happy with and I voted for the Ferndale House, that we've got even more busy district there, and we just put parking there. I'd hate to see that repeated here, especially at this scale. So I'd have a hard time supporting that. So if you ask how much retail we should have, I would say all of it retail on that front.
If I could respond through the chair as well. I'm in complete agreement. I think 100% retail in our central business district is expected. I would rather see that area mirror West 9 Mile, where there's storefronts and there's, diversified business and housing above it, and really kind of stick with that character. I mean, that's the character, is that you have storefronts, or you have restaurants, or you have some type of service, or even office, and then you have housing above it. This is, a main stretch that's been underutilized. And with the, as I voted on the last project, I think one of the biggest problems with that area is it's not connected. There isn't continuity through there that allows people or attracts people to walk there. And by doing this, we're just telling people there's no reason to come down here.
Through the chair, another thing to keep in mind here is that this is directly across the street from Credit Union 1, which is pulled back a little ways from the sidewalk, and there isn't really an opportunity on the south side of the street there to really develop any connecting retail. So if it's going to happen on that strip, which is something that we'd like to see happen in the central business district, to see that connectivity between the Hilton and the Woodward area, it's got to be on the north side of the street, because the Credit Union 1 side of the street is already taken up by a large office building that's pulled back from the street. So having this directly across the street, if we have nothing but a blank wall essentially at the ground level, you're creating a canyon there, where there's no chance of retail, and especially on the north side. While I appreciate what you've tried to do to articulate the front of the building to make it a little bit more visually interesting, it's still a long, long blank space for pedestrians.
And just to back up on that, I think we've done the groundwork of making traffic calming, bike-friendly, pedestrian-friendly. We've kind of built 9 Mile, priming it for that, for additional pedestrian experience of in and out. So to bring that many people who want to live and grow and explore Ferndale, but give them nothing on that main floor, I think you're just pushing them into the parking lot, into their cars. They don't have that street front experience in their own building. So I think the connection of living above a retail space makes it even cooler to be there. I know you have to work with price points and so on, but there's got to be a balance. So maybe this needs to address some of that. Or, and may I ask, the other developments in East Lansing, were they in commercial districts?
Very
what was
similar,
their-
very similar. The two that are very similar to this are along Michigan Avenue across the street from the campus.
Through the chair, were those developments the same scale as this project? With the same number of apartments and number of parking spaces?
No, they were on much smaller sites. They were the same height, but they were on smaller sites.
Were they not more dorm-type living?
No, they were apartments. We had some studio, some two-bedroom, and some four-bedroom.
Yeah, well, I think you've kind of heard the main issue, I think that the planning commission is going to have with the use. I think some of the other details can be, worked out through design, but, yeah.
We appreciate your comments, and obviously, very respectfully, we will look at what's possible there. Essentially, what you're talking about happening is the parking situation would change entirely. It'd be completely different. And the economics of the project probably don't work. But as I said, very respectfully, we'll explore what we can do about it. But to run retail that whole length and the parking that would be required and the change in terms of the economics, the potential income, probably would kill the project.
Well, I think, our job at the Planning Commission is to really reinforce the long-term vision and not the immediate need.
Absolutely.
And there's lots of examples of it working a block down the street even, with first floor retail and upper story residential.
No,
Understand you're trying to reach a certain price point, but.
Sure. No, again, very respectfully, we understand what you're saying, and we will explore it. But we went down that road before, and it didn't work, but we'll look at it again.
Are there other final thoughts, other things we haven't addressed or brought up at all this evening?
Just that I do appreciate the study and the thought that you put into it, and certainly coming proactive, because a lot of times we don't reach the people that have a lot of say. And I think we would try and take into consideration any breaks or setbacks or anything that would have less impact on the neighborhood.
Sure.
And we always do encourage our applicants to speak with adjacent property owners to get their preferences of screening, buffering, things of that nature as well. So, right. Anything else?
One other thought. So there's an alley back there. Any thoughts on the future of the alley and expansion and just the discussion we've had at the master plan?
Clearing the lines.
Well, you mean,
Just how,
well, it's currently a functioning alley.
right.
Right.
So
Just
any
maintaining it, you mean?
I'm sorry?
You mean keeping it as a functioning
Yeah,
alley?
maintaining it, or the exploring of, livable alleys. I guess, the discussion that came up in the master plan about how to make them more pedestrian or more integrated instead of just a service demarc or something like that.
Yeah, I think,
So just to keep that in mind is,
I don't know if, Justin, if you've talked to them at all about that type of
Most-
engaging with the alley a little bit more?
Mostly just that, as part of the master plan, we're trying to retain most of the alleys going forward, and so that was really the primary discussion.
I do think it's a little bit of a, I would say, different situation, but you do have,
just to keep in mind.
To follow up on that point, where you're talking about keeping the alley engaged, are you saying you'd prefer, instead of the 2 curb cuts along the side streets, utilize that? Is that?
Not necessarily, it was just that potential for alley use in multiple ways came up in discussion, and I just think if we keep that in mind anytime we're in a situation where you might consider what else could be brought in or advised.
We were talking about, in terms of our master plan, the city has a number of alleys, both used and underutilized, and maybe using the alleys as opportunity to maybe increase some development opportunities in terms of granny flats, accessory dwelling units, things of that nature, but they're more commonly associated with single-family homes and how to increase their potential access off of alleys.
One more thing, I'm sorry. The dog park, I like the idea. I like that you've done your research on how many people have pets. I think that's something we have to consider going forward too, is if we're going to build something that's going to be denser, close to residential. So we didn't really discuss it here, but maybe that's something we think about a little bit.
Yeah.
Hours of operation or something, is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, that's all. I agree. Yep. Do you have a comment?
I don't know if you're really married to residential, then this isn't going to work, but retail and office is much more profitable square footage. So couldn't you do first floor retail, second mid-floor office, and top floor retail or residential? I mean, financially, it could work out, and you wouldn't require as much parking.
Could you state your name for the record, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, Greg Polika.
Thank you. I'm sure she.
When you have retail and commercial, you have to have users for that. And they don't pay the freight and that would be necessary to sustain this. If that was a great office location, there would be proposals to develop it as an office location. The demand in the area is for housing and parking, and that's the way we approached it.
And as you build more rooftops or more units, there's also increased demand for services and goods and retail. So it's
That's why this
it's
has
an,
to come
it's an
first.
evolution. As more people come, there's more demand.
If we had tenants for the offices, we'd build offices. But we are comfortable that we have tenants for the apartments, and so that's the purpose for building the apartments first.
Just in response to that, I think if you come to any part of Ferndale, on most nights, we definitely have the people, and we definitely have the attractiveness that's getting people here, and we definitely have people looking for apartments. And we're almost at a maximizing point where if you try to go to different places in Ferndale on nights and stuff like that, as we discussed earlier, we're at a entertainment maximum right now, and we need office to balance it out, and we want work, live here, and those are the things that the city wants. And we want housing as well, but we need that other feature in there.
We can't cause demand for office. We can only respond to it.
Yeah, I know.
All right, any other questions?
I'm sorry, just to further comment on that. 2 years ago, there was a huge project called 360 that had a lot of office space because there is a demand for new office space in Ferndale.
The only thing I could add to that is as we were exploring this project, we had commercial brokers survey potential retail and other type uses, and they had very little response. That's really part of what drove us, and we didn't make that clear earlier. I give you an example. Everybody says to us, Starbucks, bring in a Starbucks. And they said,
Nobody in Ferndale says that. Nobody in Ferndale says that.
Not here.
No.
That's what we've heard. And, well, I'll tell you what, you don't have to worry about it because Starbucks said no way.
Well, that's good. That's a mutual feeling. And just at a final note on that, just because we are wrapping up our master plan, and as part of that master plan, we did an extensive market analysis for our downtown area, and there's numbers showing the need for retail, office, and residential. All that's public information. So I would encourage you to take a look at that market analysis.
That was given to us at the beginning, and we did go through it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, any other final comments?
I guess I have one comment about the materiality of the project here. I appreciate the use of hardy board or this wood paneling as an effective material. I would question the use of lap siding in a central business district area where you're across the street from municipal buildings and office buildings. It's much more of a neighborhood, residential, single-family home sort of product that, to me, doesn't have the character of a downtown district. So I know there's a variety of materials that they make, but lap siding to me seems to be a questionable choice.
More food for thought. Anything else? All right, good luck. If you have questions, you know how to reach the staff. All right, thank you. All right. Next up on the agenda is administrative items. We do have a new commissioner here this evening, so it's Cassio, correct?
Correct.
Michael Cassio. If you want to maybe give the commission a brief 2-minute, how you do?
Hello. I met some of you the other night at the City Hall meeting. I am a Ferndale resident. I moved here a year and a half ago with my wife. I live up on Maplehurst. I'm an architect by trade. I've been in and around the area for about 10 years. I love Ferndale. It's a place I've been spending a lot of time for the past 10 years. And I just kind of wanted to give back to the community a little bit and, you know, help shape the city that I live in. I know that there's a lot of changes happening right now, and I would like to be there's some things that have happened that I think have been great and some things that I think have been maybe a little questionable, but I'd like to see things moving forward in a good fashion. You guys all seem to be very passionate, so I'm happy to be part of the team.
Thanks. If you guys, maybe just everyone introduce themselves really quickly, just for.
Sure. I'm Dan Martin, City Council person.
Ian Williamson.
Nina Kelly.
Josh Fine.
Sarah Rodiger.
We're not going to even tell them anything about ourselves.
We're all Ferndale residents.
I'm Kate Baker. I grew up on Maplehurst, so I don't know where you live.
Oh, great.
Deb Brazen. And Krista Czar. And I'll offer a little more. Been a Ferndale resident for 23+ years.
Wow. Okay.
And we have a nice mix of, I think there's probably like, well, this half of the commission has been on it for probably a while, 10 years almost.
Yeah.
And then the other half is all new in the past.
I'm telling you, it's funny they would
3
put the name
years.
tags out. I haven't sat next to Kate since the first meeting.
I know, they're so afraid of you.
That was not on purpose, no.
I know.
Barb's so afraid of me.
And Michael also serves on the DDA Design Committee, right?
Oh,
As well?
fantastic.
Correct. So he's been involved prior to this, and so we appreciate him joining another commission.
Wow. Okay, I know we didn't add this to the agenda earlier, but I think Kate was out of the room when we talked about amending our agenda. I think you had an item B about the parking committee to add.
I got a little bit thrown because there was no committee items, and so when we were doing amendments to the agenda, I'm looking at it and going, I don't know where to put it. So I'm sorry. I should have offered an amendment to the agenda. And I'd emailed Justin and Joe about it, and Jordan might have been on it. So the city's got a parking committee that's been formed, and we definitely need a planning commission representative on that parking committee. I was asked to be that representative, but they keep meeting during the day. So it's just not reasonable for me to get back up here from work at 10 or 11 in the morning, unfortunately, as much as I would love to. I don't have that flexibility. So I wanted to make sure to let the commission know there's a lot of work going on parking, and I want to make sure that there's someone from the commission that can actively represent the commission, particularly for conversations like we're having tonight about the physical appearance and location of some of these major parking facilities that are or will be coming, whether they're municipal or private. So I don't know, Justin, how you want to proceed on it, if you want to send a note around about the next meeting or...
Yeah.
In general, are there people available to meet during the day? I think it's probably pretty hard for most of us who are all working professionals, so I'm not
And that's
sure
the
any of
challenge. It's the challenge too, because most of the committee is all local business owners, and that's the only time they can meet. And so it's a challenge either way. But if anybody can make it, we'd appreciate it. It's a key meeting, I will say.
And Joe
When is it?
was so kind and offered to like meet with me separately, and I mean, like, very kind and accommodating, but I just think if there's anyone from the commission who can actually be a part of those
Right,
conversations, it's really important.
It's 10 o'clock a.m. and on September 28th.
Could we perhaps invite the parking committee to make a presentation here in October?
Yeah,
Just
that
to
would be good.
report
Yeah, I
out
think-
on work to date?
yeah, I
They
think-
should be close by then, right?
Yeah, I think Joe is planning on doing that. So, but yeah, I'll remind him. That's a great
Thanks.
idea.
I also wanted to ask a question, if we're done talking parking. Earlier today, there was a question about whether or not someone had their BZA approval, and not to speak for the chair, but I think there was a question about process, which approval comes first, and are we essentially forcing the BZA's hand if we approve a site plan contingent upon their approval of a variance?
Yeah, do we know historically, is that how we've always handled it here? Because I just know in a lot of communities that I've worked for, they don't like the planning commission to make a recommendation based on a variance, because that essentially pressures the ZBA to approve it.
So going to be
I mean, I would say
Most communities I work for say that has to come first, because if they deny the variance, then they have to come back to us anyway. And so I would always prefer to see any variances that we required be obtained before coming to us, because if it doesn't get granted, it's a moot point.
I would go with this board's recommendation. I mean, I was told that I could pursue it either way. The timing worked out that they also, I think, didn't want to go to the BZA if the parking reduction wouldn't have been approved either, so it was kind of back and forth, so, but I'll take this group's preference.
Yeah, I
I don't know if anyone else feels.
No, I feel the opposite, actually. To counter that, I think we put an undue burden of time on the process if, with only meeting once a month, that we have to wait to coordinate those meetings in such a manner that would have added 30 days to this applicant's process. And I don't know that that's necessarily a great way to build a reputation to do business.
What would it would just swell? They would have went to the ZBA this month and planning commission next month. So I don't think it would have added any time. It just would have changed the order in which they went to things.
No, I hear you, but
As the representative of the zoning board on planning commission,
Yeah.
I'll say first, I don't think that the zoning board, at least the current makeup of the members, I don't think anyone's going to feel pressured that they have to approve anything because the planning.
come on, man. No.
The planning commission has approved it, but I do tend to agree that I think it makes a little bit more sense, get the variance first, and then you can come for site plan approval with a, kind of the complete package. Because otherwise, you're right, the delay is going to be the same anyway. You do still have to get the variance. You still
All
have
right,
to go.
well, I'll defer to the group, but
Yeah, I'll go with the preference, but I think the other thing I was thinking about as well is that you publicly notice for the variance, and then this board hasn't seen the site plan, so then there's a lot of extra questions that the BZA has to deal with that, I would still bring to the next plan commission meeting anyway, but that was just the other thinking behind it.
I guess the thought is, let's pretend they deny it, right? So then they have to redesign their site to have a 24-foot wide aisle, which theoretically could shift some other, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Some other things that may have site plan implications, whereas this way it's like, well, if they deny it, essentially the project dies, they have to come back to us.
But what's to stop them from going congruent? Say BZA met before we did this month, but they could go to both boards in this month.
I think that's the best bet, actually.
As long as there's enough time to notice.
But now you're saying they have to go there first. Or what happens if we're first and BZA is next week?
They're always back to back, though.
Okay.
Zoning board is always the Tuesday before.
All right. They didn't. I mean, in this instance, they didn't get their site plan revisions completed enough time to get the public notice out. So, but
Okay.
I mean, if I have to make them wait, then that's.
Yeah, my preference would just be to get a decision from the ZBA first, as long as it's not an unreasonable delay. I don't want to hold up things for the point of just bureaucracy, but as a rule of thumb policy, I think it should generally go there.
And they actually were also thinking about, because that was the only variance, they were thinking about if they could adjust things, and so there was a chance that that condition wouldn't have even been on the plan, but, yeah.
All right, should we talk about the master plan, like potential dates at all? Because I still think we have a lot of work to do. I mean, not in terms of massive changes, but it's a big document. There's a lot of discussion. What are people's general, if anyone knows of a block of dates or dates that don't work right now?
There's
We were going to aim for the 5th, I thought. Wasn't that the idea?
yeah, I could send out a doodle on and get people's schedules. That week of October 3rd, there is not a planning commission, a city council meeting or BZA or parks.
I can make something work that week,
So,
I'm sure.
Yeah, that week for me is open completely right now.
Okay.
In terms of meetings.
Well, I could always, how about I send out a doodle and then see the response and then put a placeholder there?
Right, so was it the goal then, again, talking about how we handled that earlier, we were kind of rushed into wrapping that up because of our regularly scheduled meeting. How are we, so you guys are going to set up a Google Doc that we each manually edit?
If that works for the group, I think, yeah, then everyone can collaborate, and if someone's reading something the other way, maybe there's going to be some conversation between two people on, no, I
So
see
you
it
don't
this
want
way,
any
I see it this
physically
way.
marked up copies that we've already done? So we have to go back now and redo
no,
all of our markups?
No, I would accept those, absolutely accept those, and maybe I could start the Google Doc with that.
Okay.
I have no problem summarizing that.
Okay, and then the goal would be, that would be up by this week.
Yep.
And whatever, maybe Monday.
Yeah.
And then we would have the following.
Yeah, we'll shoot for Friday, so.
Okay, because it said it's there's a lot of, I haven't gotten all the way through, to be honest. It's a bummer. I tried. Okay. Other?
Can I say, ask one thing, or mention something that's totally unrelated, or is that not, am I not allowed to do that?
We're almost wrapping up the meeting right now. We're kind of at the end, and then if you want to talk to us after. Is there any other master plan items?
The Parks Committee's meeting tomorrow.
And their plan is to adopt their,
Their plan, I guess, approve to distribute the plan, and then,
and just for future, I'd be curious to see it, because we've never seen that either. So I'm kind of curious.
That was one of our things the last time was we hadn't seen that parks plan way back when we met about everything.
I think that what they're approving tomorrow is the implementation list, and then they would approve the plan after that, but.
Is that part of our, like, we're adopting that as part of our master plan?
I think that will be a secondary item.
Gotcha, okay. Just that, I want to make sure we see that too.
Mhm,
Again,
mhm.
along with the market studies, like I said,
Yeah.
all those should be attached and linked and.
Yep.
Okay. All right, before we, what's the word? Adjourn, I guess we do have one more, member of the audience, we do one more call to the audience. Keep it brief to 3 minutes if you will. 30 seconds, even better.
First of all, thank you all. Great points with your the credit union thing. As always, every time I come across, it's been years since I've interfaced with a government this closely, but it's so nice to see it still working the same way. I pepper every time I see somebody this little idea, and since you're all here, I'm going to do it before I leave. Man, when the parking structures get built, where they get built, the Withington thing would make such a great central park with concrete pads in the background for food trucks and vendors, and then even building another row of like little retail back there. Just wanted to say that to the group because I think that'd be fantastic. That's all. Thank you so much. Thank you. Have
Thank
a
you for
great
coming
evening.
out. Thank you. I'm sure we'll see you again if it proceeds. All right, anyone else? All right, we adjourn at 9:20.